Hello, everyone. This is a podcast series, The Remdesivir Files, a COVID-19 Chronicle, a 20 episode deep dive into one of the most discussed, debated, and at times misunderstood drugs in the COVID-19 story, Remdesivir. I'm your host, Sowmya, and in this premiere episode, we trace the origin story of Remdesivir, a molecule that was once a sidelined antiviral and then became a symbol of scientific hope during a global crisis. To help us unpack the science, the history, and the unexpected spotlight on this drug, I am joined by Saakshi Sharma, a microbiologist researcher. Saakshi, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad this podcast is happening because the story of Remdesivir is a fascinating one that really highlights how science evolves, especially during emergencies.
Let's start at the very beginning. Remdesivir didn't come out of nowhere. It had a life long before the pandemic. Where does its story begin?
Great place to begin. Remdesivir was developed by a company called Gilead Sciences, initially as a part of their work on potential treatments for emerging viral threats. Its original target was actually the Ebola virus during the 2014-16 outbreak in West Africa. Now, Ebola is caused by a filovirus, quite different from coronaviruses. But what made remdesivir interesting was that it acts as a broad spectrum antiviral. That means it's not designed to target just one virus, but has the potential to work against a whole class of RNA viruses. It works by mimicking one of the RNA bases, adenosine to be precise. When the virus tries to replicate its genetic material, remdesivir slips into the chain, causing premature termination. In simple terms, it interrupts the viral replication process.
That's incredible and quite sophisticated. But if it was not designed for Ebola, what happened there? Why didn't it become a frontline treatment?
During the Ebola outbreak, several experimental therapies were tested in clinical trials, including remdesivir. While it did show some promise in preclinical models, meaning animal and lab studies, in actual human trials, it did not perform as well as other candidates, especially monoclonal antibody therapies, which proved more effective. So it wasn't discarded, but it did not make the cut for widespread use in Ebola. But crucially, those studies laid a foundation. We had early safety data, dosing strategies, and some pharmacokinetic profiles already mapped out. That's one reason it could be redeployed so quickly during the COVID-19 crisis.
It sounds like Remdesivir was quietly waiting in the wings, so to speak. Was there any buzz about it before COVID-19 hit?
Honestly, among infectious disease researchers, yes, there was interest. Especially after MERS and SARS outbreaks in the early 2000s and 2012, lab studies showed that remdesivir could inhibit those coronaviruses quite effectively in cell culture and even in some animal models. So it had this sort of potential backup tool status. But from a commercial standpoint, there wasn't a huge push to develop antivirals for coronaviruses pre-2020 because they were not causing ongoing global health emergencies. That changed very quickly with SARS-CoV-2.
So when COVID-19 began to unfold in early 2020, was Remdesivir immediately recognized as a contender?
Yes and no. In January 2020, when the first full genomic sequence of SARS-CoV-2 was shared publicly, researchers immediately began running simulations and lab tests to see what existing compounds might work. Remdesivir was on that list. It moved quickly into testing because we had enough safety data and a scientific rationale. Within weeks, there were compassionate use cases, meaning doctors trying it on seriously ill patients before formal trials had even started. That's how urgent the situation was.
That sense of urgency is so striking. And of course, the world was desperate for any glimmer of hope. Can you explain for listeners what makes remdesivir different from something like, say, a vaccine or an antibody therapy?
Absolutely. Vaccines are preventive. They train your immune system in advance. Antibody therapies work by neutralizing the virus directly. Remdesivir, on the other hand, is what we call a direct acting antiviral. It doesn't boost immunity, it targets the virus machinery. The idea is that by disrupting the viral replication process, you reduce the viral load in the body and give the immune system a better chance to control the infection, especially in the early stages of disease. That's a big distinction because timing is everything with antivirals.
Right. And we'll get into those clinical trial results in future episodes. But to stay with this early phase, when remdesivir first started being used against COVID-19, what was the response in the medical community?
There was cautious optimism. Doctors on the front lines were looking for anything to help reduce hospital stays or prevent progression to severe illness. Anecdotal reports started coming in, some encouraging, some inconclusive. But that's always the danger zone in medicine: anecdote versus evidence. You need rigorous trials to know what's real and what's not. So, while the buzz was building, researchers were racing to organize proper studies, and that's what we'll explore in your next episodes.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask a bigger picture question. What does the early story of remdesivir tell us about drug discovery and repurposing?
It shows us a few things. First, that no research is ever wasted. Drugs developed for one disease may end up helping with something entirely different, and fast tracking becomes possible when a solid foundation has already been laid. Second, it shows how crucial basic science is. You don't know when or where the next outbreak will hit, but if you have invested in broad spectrum approaches, you are a few steps ahead. And finally, it reminds us that science is a moving target. A drug's reputation can shift drastically depending on the evidence, context, and timing. Remdesivir's story is still being written, and it's full of lessons.
Well said. Saakshi, thank you so much for walking us through this first chapter in remdesivir's history.
Thank you, Sowmya. Looking forward to the rest of the series.
That concludes episode 1 of the Remdesivir Files, a COVID-19 Chronicle. In the next episode, we'll talk about the global anxiety that COVID brought and what happened when remdesivir went global. Join us next time. And if you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, rate the show, and share it with your friends or colleagues. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and thank you for listening.